Hey everyone, Internet's likely sad book reader here. Today I want to talk about This Ordinary Stardust, a scientist's path from grief to wonder by Alan Townsend. I'm not an expert at any scientific genre or anything since I'm just a high school graduate that didn't learn them from the basic, but I love trying to go through books, explaining them, giving space between my reading schedule so my head don't feel too much like it's going to explode. I was going through the usual monthly discount when I found one of the books that I've been meaning to read, The Origin of Time, that is based on Stephen Hawking's theory of everything. And I also saw this book, which at first I thought just another book about stars that I might skip since it's on discount at the same time as the Stephen Hawking book, and I'd rather read that than this. But reading through the synopsis made me change my mind. A decade ago, both the author's 4-year-old daughter and his wife developed an unrelated brain cancer. Just one of those news can be a catastrophic news that spiral you out of control, and the other had double that experience. That understandably changed his view on life and on his work. And with a synopsis like that, I couldn't refuse trying to read the book, so I took it. Ever since the author heard from a class back in his school that we are all just stardust, all the things that make us in material form is the same atoms that make stars and planets. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, all part that makes us our dogs, our houseplant, and everything else. And even when our life ends, that part will still be there. It didn't make him feel like nothing. If anything, the author finds comfort in that knowledge. It feels like despite everything, it's still you. Whether we are alive or not, all of us are stardust spreading from one to another and thus exist in each other. Because of that fascination, the author ended up studying these elements. And in his study, he found many ways on how we are deeply connected to each other, even in ways that we would never think of if we just see ourselves on a day-to-day life. The forest near his house contains traces from Mongolia and the ocean in between, and there are most likely trees in the Amazon forest that come from animals that have gone extinct and lands that used to be connected. This study of tracing these elements from a time before we exist is called biogeochemistry. He studied not only how elements comes to be and how fertilizer will work in this cornfield and will it kill sea life another greater mile away. Studying it teaches him the ebbs and flow and the inevitability of life. Science can be limiting and dangerous when it's become purely for the sake of science. Just like when only business are used as excuses to how to handle a business. Science also have a history of oppression, abuse, exclusion, and violence. In history through the moon that I've read, for example, when alchemy that comes from the Arab Middle East that will eventually become chemistry, the foundation of modern medicine, at one point it used to be called witchcraft and people are burned on the stake for practicing them. Not to mention the whole heliocentrism versus geocentrism. But science can also teach us to be the best version of ourselves. It teaches us how to be patient and handle failure because it's a practice of fucking around and find out where you often need to go over the same problem over and over again to figure out a solution. The author haven't realized yet, but this practice will eventually help him once he got the news that the doctor found something in his doctor MRI. He was in the Amazon forest with a colleague taking out a piso de pe or chico flea from his foot before he can lay eggs on them. Don't make the same mistake as I do and Google it, it's horrifying. He's staying at a camp in central Amazon on a road that led to the river Santarem. A lot of the forests have changed because of logging. The forests have an abundance of varieties of trees, but since the money trees usually just the mahogany etc., to get to them they'll also have to cut through tens of lesser trees before getting to the one good tree. And as a result, a lot of the big animals are no longer in those sections of Amazon. A lot of what's left behind are also dry trees with holes in them from logging damages that don't sell well, but burns really good when summer comes. So they often led to great forest fire because they were not cleaned out to save money. These fires unfortunately also burns a lot of the nutrients from the land to smoke too. They usually become really green for a while after rain washes the fire away, but it won't be for long. And since the trees that usually takes the water from the rain are gone, most of these places often flood in heavy rain. Our author and his colleague Greg are there to study this change in the environment and their impact to the species there. It's a tough and very labor-intensive work, especially back when there's not much technology to help them easily measure the forest yet. It's also sad work looking at how much the forests are gone because of the choices we made. But since they're there to try and help, curiosity helps dampen the depression in many ways. Out of curiosity, some scientists have looked into how worms turn into butterfly, a process that is nowhere as pretty as the result with a lot of goo and enzyme that should be more traumatic the more you look into the process, but instead the result of it is a hopeful creature that flies instead of crawling on the ground. Sometimes in nature, there's a process of disintegration that is necessary for the planet growth. The other moment of this disintegration comes when he and his wife found out that their 4-year-old baby have a tumor that will need brain surgery to remove it. She had what is called a craniopharyngioma, a type of tumor that happens often in children where the tumor grows in their pituitary gland. The tumor didn't threaten to metastasize and grow to various parts of the child, but since it was located in the brain, even if it grew just by a little, it can be very dangerous. It can affect everything from eyesight to the nerve controlling her body function to even her life. Part of the other work in Amazon is in looking at different patches of its burnt forest and finding out what it would look like in the far future, hoping to find places and ways that will bounce back to its natural form before all the devastation in maybe a decade later, and it is the same hope that he had to cope with his daughter getting this tumor. And this is something new for the author. A decade before this, the most grief he ever had was him and Greg getting kicked out of the Amazon project he had because Brazil at that time didn't want the world to know more about their deforestation. So using excuses like how NASA is the one who partially funded the project to study the remains of the burned forest, they managed to make it about politics and chop the project down. Because science is also a study about human failings, and some people cannot handle having them pointed out, even when it means to figure out how to make them better. And losing this project means he's in danger of losing his job as a university professor. Thankfully back then, he managed to recreate the project in another side of the world in a remote location in Osa, Costa Rica, where he began collecting leaves to study the land. And amidst the busy hour of experimenting on this new location is where he met his current wife, Diana Reed Remergood, another researcher that also come to the project to study how the forest comes to be. They have their ups and downs just like many relationships, but they made it together. And now their children need them more than ever as the family have to navigate how to save their daughter's life. They found a doctor that helped them through the long process of such an invasive operation until finally the doctor went through with it. Unfortunately, the operation is only partially successful. Part of the tumor has attached itself to important nerves that will affect her eyesight among others, so it has to be left behind. And for those who have dealt with cancer within the family, you know that leaving a tumor behind means having to deal with a higher chance of cancer regrowth. So they have to also figure that out before it becomes a problem. Meanwhile, remember that this is all happening in America, the land of the most expensive medical everything. So the family decided to find work that paid better to pay for everything, which they fortunately get despite having to move to another state. Life finally goes back to some sort of normalcy for them, with their daughter safe from the tumor. But it doesn't take long for another disaster to strike. Diana started to have weird symptoms. Her hands started hurting, which at first she tried to ignore because it might just be carpal tunnel, but the pain started moving to her elbow, and then she started losing muscle control of her left hand. She went to the doctor and was diagnosed with brain tumor, glioblastomas, practically incurable except for a few miracle cases, and she somehow had two of them with the left tumor larger than the right one. She had maybe 5 years left to live. It's especially painful not only because this is just after everything their daughter just went through, but also because Diana is an active runner that is much healthier than the other. But despite the small chance of winning, she wants to fight it. She wants to live, she wants to see her daughter grow up, go to high school, and graduate from college. The book doesn't have much in terms of learning about science. It has some, but that's not the focus of the book. Since it's a memoir, the focus of the book is just the author telling the story of the struggle that he went through in his life. It's closer to John Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking than it is to Stephen Hawking's Theory of Everything. It's a very human story that often is not included in a lot of scientific discussion, and I'm glad that I decided to read it. Scientists are often turned into the villain in some stories that people made up. The Brazilian government that kicked off the author from his project in Amazon forest, for example. Then there's also pseudo-science believer and conspiracy theories that often pipeline themselves to anti-science. They often start to see scientists as them, like they're some sort of a single entity instead of a lot of different individuals living a very different life who don't know most of other scientists. And books like this, where an author can share how vulnerable they are, I think is unironically important because then people will see how they grieve, how during their grief they still have to struggle to make a living too, how money and connection with other people is an everyday worry too for them, how they can lash out to other people because of the pain and stress they have to deal as their loved ones are dying. Our perspective of history is often so small that we forget what is happening now has been happening for a long time. We see generation mock the next generation over and over again and still it continues. Because for some people, their life is the only life they knew. We see how people try to deny science despite all the counter evidence that there are good that came out of it. Meanwhile, the people who studied their whole life to be scientists like the author is just another person who also had to find a way to struggle with loss. In December 15, 2015, Diana died because of the tumor, but she lived on in Ellen and her daughter. She lived on in people who she has met, her family and friends, and her colleagues. She lived on in the scientific studies that she has done during her short stay in the world, and she lived on in the people who read the book that the author decided to share with the world. I give this a 4.25. What do you think? Let me know if I miss anything, so leave your thoughts in the comment below and subscribe to the channel. That's about it. See ya.